That's a huge thing these days. They sort of shadow ban you, where they don't outright ban you, but you went from being able to place a pick slip of like $500 down to like $1. Like, well, this isn't even worth my time anymore. Let me go someplace else.
Hey, this is Jesse here, and you're about to hear my discussion with Trent from BullRush, which is fantasy sports supercharged. In this one, Trent talks about BullRush's origins as a prop trading competition, which since has expanded into peer-to-peer sports picking competitions, how he thinks about the long-term convergence of financial trading and sports betting platforms, the role of gamification in creating sticky user experiences, why he prefers to self-fund BullRush over raising institutional capital, and how his team is preparing for their first NFL season in market. Trent is an accomplished entrepreneur with a lot going for him in BullRush, and I know you'll enjoy this episode as much as I did. The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. Positionless marketing gives every marketer the power to execute any marketing task instantly and independently, and Optimove Ignite Plus is its program to support early-stage iGaming startups. If you're attending SBC Summit in Lisbon this September, you can find Optimove at stand A555 and tell them that Betting Startups sent you to receive your first month free. All right, we are back here on the Betting Startups podcast. We're just a short couple of weeks out now from the start of NFL. We got college ball about to kick off here as well. It is getting into crunch time for all builders in the space. And with me today, I'm joined by Trent from BullRush, who is one of those builders. Trent, welcome to the podcast. How you doing here a couple of weeks out from the all-important football season kicking off?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show, Jesse. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely, Trent. For those watching on video, you can see Trent is kitted out nicely in his branded t-shirt. Nice backdrop there with the BullRush branding. Before we get into BullRush, Trent, let's get a sense of who you are. If you can introduce yourself to the audience, give us a bit of a sense of your background and major chapters of your journey prior to starting BullRush.
Yeah, certainly. So grew up in Central Illinois, went to University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, where I competed in track and field and cross country. Post-college, actually ran professionally for a year with Brooks. And then I had the opportunity at the time, because I had two brothers up there, to go trade futures contracts in Chicago. And this was in the heyday back in 2007-8 when the financial crisis was happening. And so things were moving around. They were making a lot of money. They convinced me to stop running and come, move up with them and start, basically day trading futures. And so I was hired on at one of the leading prop trading firms at the time. They were rated the #1 prop trading group by the CME in 2007, and I joined them in early 2009. I day traded futures for a number of years as a volatility chaser. Quickly realized, after about 3 years of doing that is a rough way to make a living full time. And so transitioned at the time to the back office and went to the brokerage space and worked in a number of roles in the brokerage space over the years, from institutional sales to running the operations. And that exposed me a little bit to the technology side of the industry and specifically the gaps. And then in 2016, I was speaking with a few partners, and we ended up starting to build out what became the first ever SaaS CRM system to the retail prop industry. And so we started that in 2016, but it really officially kicked off in 2020. It was about a 4-year build-up. Everybody likes startups. This was the epitome of a startup, where we, had a client sort of, and we worked on it. It took about 4 years to get a second client and really build out that product. And then it just sort of exponentially grew from there. And so that's what I've been working on for the better part of, about 9 years now. And then BullRush has been the focus of mine for the past 2.5 years. So quick journey about who I am, but roughly that's what I do. So started in the trading industry and have been progressing into more the betting sports side of the industry.
So you mentioned about 2.5 years for the BullRush chapter here. Trent, take us back 2.5 years ago, I guess, to the origins of that. And it sounds like you were all in on this CRM SaaS for prop trading, which is, I guess, niche, but as they say, riches and niches. So I'm sure that's been a compelling business. But what were the origins of BullRush, right? Like, what prompted you to put your attention all of a sudden on real money gaming? Obviously, the proliferation of betting, I'm sure, contributed to that. But from a business perspective, what sort of triggered you to actually take a hard look at it and look at opportunities in the space?
Yeah, certainly. So in 2021, we actually built out technology to run multi-participant trading competitions at FPFX Tech is the tech company. And we initially launched it and primarily leased that technology out to brokers, and they use it as lead generation tools. So they'd offer a free competition and then give away either cash or money into a brokerage account to go trade with. And that had a little bit of success. But then we were getting asked by these retail prop firms to do it. And all of a sudden we leased it to them, and they were putting 50,000, 70,000, 80,000 users in a month-long trading competition, which obviously naturally gets you thinking, like, they're free. Why can't I go to a paid entry side? So this is 2021. I quickly realized why we couldn't do paid entry. I asked the lawyers, and like, whoa, that's a pretty big undertaking. You need to basically go get a full gambling license. And, if you go do that, it's state by state, they tax you a lot. It's just a really expensive endeavor. And so ultimately I shelved it for a number of years. And then in 2023, I picked it back up because, as a startup, you're an entrepreneur. You get something in your mind and you just keep thinking about it, and it nags you and eats at you, and you just never, you can't get out of your mind. And so ultimately picked it back up. And the original idea was to go to Curacao, get a gambling license there, and then just exclude the United States completely. Ultimately, wrote the whole white paper about what BullRush was because I wanted it to be more than just trading competitions. I wanted it to be sports picking competitions. I wanted it to be full on gamified with experience points, badges, certificates. And so I spent about 6 months writing this white paper about what will BullRush become. Sat with my two partners. We went over, refined it, made sure it was exactly what we were looking for. And then we gave it back to the lawyers. And in 2023 and a little bit before that, the whole game of skill versus sports betting and what's gambling has really taken off. And the lawyers advised, hey, if you can prove this a game of skill, you can fall underneath the DFS side of things. And so that triggered an 18-month process to prove that trading and sports picking is a game of skill. And I truly do believe it is. But that's the genesis of it. And that's sort of what led up to today.
Cool, Trent. Well, let's do a deep dive now on BullRush. Why don't you try and summarize the white paper here? And just to start with, give the audience just a high concept overview of what is BullRush, what do you have in market, and what's the overall value proposition to your users?
Yeah, so we have two elements of BullRush. There's both multi-participant trading competitions and there's multi-participant sports picking competitions. The best way I like to describe it, especially on the sports picking side, is we've blended fantasy sports and sports betting into what I call fantasy betting. So it's similar to a poker tournament. You join either a free or paid entry competition. We give you a virtual bankroll. You then go and place picks with that virtual money. So think of like a traditional sports book where it's money lines, player props, spreads, total points, all of those are in there. The only difference is you're not betting real money. It's all virtual money that you are going and placing these picks on. The real money comes into play when you win. You either win the prize pool that we put up as BullRush, or you win the prize pool that is the entry fee of other participants. So we do that on the sports side, and then trading is very similar. You join a free or paid entry trading competition. We give you a virtual amount of money. You then go demo trade, and whoever has the largest bankroll at the end wins the cash prize. And so that's at the core. That's what we do. It's so much more than that, though. We've added so many gamified elements to it with experience points, badges, certificates. So when you win, you get a nice big certificate that you can go share to your friends and online. And the same thing, with experience points we use to like track rankings, give you different rewards in the system. So it's a full-on gamified approach to sports picking and trading.
For the sports product, Trent, how do you think about the positioning of it, right? I mean, we're obviously very familiar now with DFS, as you say, traditional sports betting. There's obviously new verticals now emerging with prediction markets, sweepstakes, etc. With the mechanics of your product and what you have, though, how do you think about where it fits within that product ecosystem more broadly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sports betting and gambling has taken off in recent years with the legalization in most of the states. And then with the technology side of things, it used to be you had to go to Las Vegas, and I know Circus still does this. You go to Las Vegas, you got to go to get your pick slip, print off all your picks there. And then if you ever want to do it, you had to keep going back every week to Vegas. But now with the legalization with the states, as well as with technology, even that, the survivor pool, you go and you place your initial pick and then everything else is online. And so you're seeing this big shift to online sports, which is great because it makes it much more accessible to industry users and people that want to get it where they don't have to go to Vegas or other casinos. But what it did was it stripped away the social aspect of things. It became much more like transactional, and you lost that, interaction of going to the casino to place your picks, going in those vacations with your buddies to go do that. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring that social element back to, sports picking and trading, because trading is very similar to, trading is a very, very isolated thing. You sit in front of a computer screen all day and you watch charts go up and down and you're trading. And so we're just trying to bring that social element back to it because, I'm a believer that people, while they want to make money, and it's the reason why, a lot of these sports books become so prevalent, they're on ESPN, doing ESPN Bet now, and it's all the sponsorships on FanDuel and things. But more importantly than the money aspect, I think it's just about proving that you're good at something and competing against other people. That competition element is what's lacking with traditional sports betting as well as traditional trading. And so we try to bring that back with BullRush, that pure competition side of things, where people want to go head to head, you want to create against multi-participant. And, I think that's the reason why like an underdog took off so much. It allowed that peer-to-peer, everybody come in, try to outcompete the other people. So we are doing something, similar and tapping into that peer-to-peer, the social engagement, but we're doing it differently because what I saw was nobody was doing it traditionally with like sports betting. They were doing it more over-unders. Everything is player prop, over-under, or totals, but it didn't resonate well with the traditional sports bettor out there that is going and, thinking they're going to open up a sports book and say, hey, I want to bet on money lines, yes, player props, totals, spreads, etc. They just didn't have that element to it, in the peer-to-peer side of things.
So you've talked about the trading competitions and that product vertical within BullRush, and obviously separate to that, you have the sports competitions, which we're touching upon now. On your website, it's sort of positioned as, you have one login with BullRush for two different products. What I'm curious about, Trent, is how you view, I guess, the personas of people that trade, props, futures, whatever you want to call them. I don't know that world at all. I'm probably using the language incorrectly. And the people that are, making sports picks competitively speaking, like, as I guess you look at those two segments, what's the overlap in the Venn diagram as you see it in terms of just motivators, behaviors, drivers? Are these the same people? Are they different people? Like, just give us some color on what you see there in terms of that overlap.
Yeah, certainly. So there's definitely a lot of overlap. And we did a lot of case studies and surveys before we launched the sports side of things. When we first did BullRush, it was trading because that was my background. That's what I knew, with always the idea that we were going to go into the sports picking side of the industry. And so we started with trading, and then we had all these traders. We have 150,000 users on the platform right now. When we started positioning into the sports side, we had 30 something thousand. And we did a poll and survey with them on how much do they do sports betting. And the answer was overwhelmingly most people do it. So there's most traders also gamble or do sports betting or do crypto trading, somewhere in that realm. It doesn't necessarily always go the other way. A sports bettor doesn't necessarily go and do trading, but typically speaking, it does go from trader to sports bettor. And there's reasons for that. The parallels between the two are pretty significant. They both are, in my opinion, are a game of skill. And I think, there's enough research out there that proves this. There's a reason why the best traders in the world constantly make money. Warren Buffett makes money every single year, year over year. The best sports bettors make money year over year. The best poker players make money year over year. There's a reason, because it is skill based if you do enough of the research and spend enough time, studying things. And so that's really like a lot of the overlaps. In sports betting, you have research, and trading, you have research. In sports betting, you go and you figure out which odds are the most favorable for you, to go place your picks on. In trading, you look at the market analysis. In sports, you place your wager. In trading, you go buy, sell. And then obviously you have the outcome of that, whether it's, win money or lose money, and you go back and you assess that. But it's a very similar process in each one of those, just applied to a different market.
And you talked earlier about gamification, right? You've put gamification really at the core of the product on the sports side of things, Trent. I'm just curious how, I guess, you think about gamification in terms of how you decide what mechanics to add to the product, and really how do you determine what gamification elements add true value to that user experience without being overly gimmicky. I mean, oftentimes I see within consumer products what I call gimmicky gamification, like gamification for gamification's sake, but it looks like you've been a lot more intentional around that. So just curious how you think about where to apply gamification and really what your heuristic is in determining what elements to add.
It's funny when we first came up with BullRush, we didn't have the name yet, and I just designed the product. And it was right around when President Trump was talking about Space Force. And so it was very like cartoonish with Space Force is all our rankings instead of being different traders and things that they are now. It was around the Space Force rankings. And so we grabbed every one of their rankings and things. And it was super gamified. And it was so gimmicky, like to your point. And that was going to be the concept, and we were going to run with it. But we hadn't come up with a name yet. And then once we got into the name with BullRush, it just didn't fit the branding and like trying to put that into what, Space Force was. It was just not going to happen. And so I completely can resonate with your mentality on people over gimmick things. And we were headed down that path as well until we came up with the name BullRush. But now it's a lot of user feedback, honestly. So we came up with the initial concept again, going back to that white paper. I knew I wanted experience points. I knew I wanted badges. I knew I wanted certificates because those are common games or common features in games. And those are, in my opinion, needed because it helps that user through the journey, even if they're not necessarily making money. Because again, in these competitions, not everybody's going to be a winner. Some people are going to lose. And so going back to it's not necessarily about the dollars and cents, but having those bragging rights and competing against others. And so by just getting those badges, it helps keep people engaged. Like, oh, even though I lost, one that we have in there is like, I don't know, place 100 trades in a competition. That's a badge that you can go win, or 100 picks during a competition. And so like that helped that user, even though they may have lost the competition, it helped that user win something and just helps with that sort of dopamine that people get and then obviously want to come back and try to win other things. So yeah, it is very strategic in terms of what we put in there. And then a lot of the current features since the initial white paper have been driven by the community. We always do surveys, we always do polls about what people want versus what they don't want and let the users sort of decide and navigate it. Obviously, there's some pros and cons with that. You got to make sure the users are the right users that you want to attract and have given feedback. Like a lot of startups, we made that mistake when we initially started doing surveys. We had all the free users providing feedback, and it was like the wrong path. It's like, all right, well, we don't want the free people that have no intention of ever putting money in the system giving us feedback on what we can do better. We want all the paid users, which is the target demographic and you actually want in the product. And so we learned to refine that process along the way and make sure that we're getting the right feedback from the right users to keep going and enhancing and putting different features in.
And on your website, you talk about having 150,000 users from, I think, 170 different countries or something like that, which I don't know how many countries there are. That feels like most of them. How does that break down, Trent, in terms of those users? Are they highly concentrated within a few countries, or where does most of the traffic come from across both the trading and the sports picking side?
Yep, thanks for that. So we launched last September is when we officially launched, and it was only trading at the time. And trading, while popular in the US, it's much more popular internationally. And then like any other startup, we offer a lot of free stuff at the time. And so we got a ton of users from certain parts of the world, India, Nigeria, East Africa, that those communities go look for free things. And so we do have a lot of those users, both from the trading and the free side. But as we pivoted and started going more into the sports side, our demographic changed. And we have a lot more people from the US, UK, South Africa, Australia that have come in because the sports side of things is much more relevant to their background, their nature and things. And so we've seen a shift in our user base. When we first started, again, it was India, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, these sort of ancillary countries. And then over probably last 6 months, it started to shift, mostly first world countries that show an interest in trading and sports picking. So US, UK, Australia, etc.
Talking about user acquisition, does your guys' user acquisition strategy differ based on your product vertical, right? Is it different acquiring a user for your trading competitions versus acquiring a user for your sports picking product? And I guess a part B to that, Trent, like, are you actively cross-selling one product to the other based on which product a user was acquired into? Just give us a bit of color on sort of how you unpack all of that.
The funny thing is, no, it's similar because the industries are similar. And the more I get into the sports side, the more I realize that. So in trading, just like in any other industry right now, it's driven by influencers and paid advertising. And that's our strategy. It's influencers, SEO, and paid. But on the influencer side, you have trading educators and people that sell, signals On the sports side of things, you have, trading educate or sports educators and people that sells picks. So the type of person is almost identical. They're just applying it to a different market. And so we took the same approach here. We partner with a lot of influencers and other brands in addition to doing our paid advertising and our SEO. So thankfully we have a pretty big in-house marketing for the size of our company. For those people that don't know, we're 15 people now, including all customer service for BullRush, and then 5 of those are dedicated to marketing. And so we have a fairly big marketing department for the size of the company. So we're able to hit on the different vertical or the channels in marketing. So we have an SEO specialist, I have a social media specialist, I have a graphic designer, I have a copywriter, and then we have a person that sits over the top of it, Neil, who you met at Bet Bash, who sits over and runs the entire organization, if you will. And so we're able to hit a lot of those verticals and be able to, tap into the different audiences just because of the size of our team and the ad spend that we're able to go do and the influencer packages that we're able to put together. But in terms of strategy, no, I think across any industry right now, it's the core at what you do is you have to form partnerships with influencers. You have to dabble a little bit in paid advertising, and then, the SEO catches up over time as you build out blog posts and things like that.
Got it. And shout out to Neil, by the way, your chief marketing officer. I did get to say hello to him the other day when I was in Vegas for a brief cameo. Talk about capitalization, Trent. How have you been able to fund the project so far? Have you raised outside capital? Do you have investors? Have you self-funded it or bootstrapped? Give us some insight on that part of it to date.
Yeah, the bootstrapping term I don't like to use. I think it has a negative connotation. My other business, FPFX Tech, was very much bootstrapped. That was started by me and my 2 partners with no money. I went and sold that before we ever actually had the product. It took me 2 years to go sell a client on why they need to go do this and why they need to use us specifically. And ultimately went out and sold that. And then we sort of, grew from there. But it went from 3 partners to, there's 80 employees on that business now. That business is what funded this business. So it's me and still the same 2 partners. I stepped away from the other business, FPFX Tech, like I mentioned a couple of years ago, to focus on building out BullRush. Still sit on the board, still, help them. And then it's similar here. They don't sit day to day in BullRush, but they sit on the board to help guide, where this is ultimately going to head in the future and make the key decisions, and then just leave it to me to run day to day. Fortunately enough, that FPFX Tech business funded BullRush to start and continues to help fund to make sure it gets off the the ground and has the resources that it needs to continue to grow and scale. In terms of raising capital, we're always open to it. I've learned, though, I've done that side of the industry a little bit with other businesses, and I've learned it's all about the right partner. The whole strategic partner thing is real. If you go and you just go get some random private equity firm that doesn't know your industry, doesn't have experience in your industry, the only real value that they're providing, in my opinion, is capital. But ultimately, because they don't know your space and you just gave up board seats and you gave up, a lot of decision-making power to go raise that capital, now they're coming in with, no real knowledge of your space, and they can't help, and they ultimately hinder you in the growth path, especially as a startup. I was at the Fantasy Football Expo a couple of weeks ago talking to a gentleman, and he asked me the same question, and he was like, "Oh, glad you didn't raise any money." And we just got into a pretty deep conversation about it. And the best thing, and it happens to every startup, is like your initial idea, hopefully it's a good idea. I think BullRush is a good idea, and I think most startups think it's a good idea. But you're always pivoting, because you don't have all the answers right away. You need to go launch the product. You need to get that user feedback. Then you need to go refine the product. And so you have this pivot always. And it's what we've done at BullRush too. When we first launched, the core focus was trading, and we've gradually started pivoting into more sports, and sports is going to be the direction that we ultimately head. And had we had outside investors, that probably wouldn't have been possible, because then you got to go, oh, we're going to make this pivot. You got to pitch the idea to them. You have, a bunch of people that don't necessarily know the space chiming in. And so the overall point with that is one, make sure that, if you are going to go raise capital, which we're open to potentially, for the right partner. It really does need to be a strategic partner. They would have to be in the betting space or gambling space. We wouldn't just go randomly raise money, but thankfully it's not needed right now. But if the right partner came along, it would be more about the doors they could open versus the capital itself.
Well, nice to have a position of optionality for now, right? It doesn't sound like you capital and need to raise, but always having the option is nice. I want to zoom out just for a minute here, Trent, from BullRush specifically, and get more of an industry take from you. And look, just to set this one up, even a couple of years ago, there was very clear lines of demarcation between sports betting, financial trading, crypto, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the last year, maybe 2 years, those lines are really getting blurred. There's almost a convergence now. I mean, just the other day, literally, Robinhood, which at its core is a trading product, financial trading product, is launching NFL markets. The lines are getting blurred to say the least. And I think BullRush, to me, from the outside looking in, sort of represents this new class of product coming out that really is merging the best of these different discrete verticals. So I guess for you, as you survey the landscape and just sort of the broader trends within these ecosystems, how do you look at it? Do you see everything sort of converging into one everything app, or are we going to have sort of specific dedicated products for these different verticals over time? Like, how do you sort of see that shaking out over the long run here?
I belong to the FSGA organization, and I think you belong to it, maybe I'm wrong, but they put out their surveys every year and they do all the stats. And so at their winter conference, there was 73 million people that placed a bet or participated in fantasy sports in North America, so US and Canada. That was in the winter. By the time their summer conference happened, it was 84 million people. And so what that represents is 28% of people in North America or Canada are either playing fantasy sports or placing a sports bet at least once a year, which is astronomical. And I personally think that is just going to continue to grow over time. And the more money that goes into that side of the industry, the more people that you're going to go and see start coming into the space. So I pull up a stat here, but the total bets placed in 2023 was 120 billion. In 2024, there's 150 billion. And so it just goes in line with that continued rise in the sports betting as it becomes legalized. And you're seeing a piggyback on that, especially with the fantasy or DFS side of things, because there's such an overlap and parallel. It is over like 70% of people that sports bet or do fantasy do both. And so you just see a massive overlap between the two. And so I personally think you're going to see more of the, Robinhoods of the world. I know crypto.com did the same thing. I don't know if they're still doing it. I saw a big marketing push earlier in the year and then they sort of pulled back. So maybe they had to knock on the door from the regulators. But a lot of trading companies are starting to look at the sports side of things just because it's such an opportunity for them. And going back to my earlier comments, there's such a parallel from traders do sports betting, not always the other way around. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing like a sports book go into the trading side, but I certainly expect more trading to go into the sports betting side.
Right on, Trent. And I guess going back 20 minutes to the start of this conversation, as I alluded to, we're just a mere short number of weeks away from the start of NFL. And this will be your first full NFL, I believe, in market for BullRush, and least of which you're running an NFL Survivor contest right now with a guaranteed 100K prize. I might have it on good authority. You can correct me if I'm wrong. There might be an overlay as it stands right now. So just for anybody out there that's looking for some positive expected value, maybe something to look at. But for NFL, for you guys, as you look to this new season, Trent, what are you guys focused on and what would constitute a successful first full football season for BullRush?
Yeah, so we officially launched sports in May at the SBC America show. It's a very, very quiet launch because I wanted to see how the industry perceived it. So I'm going back to like the amount of research that we do before we do it, like any product or launch anything is insane. And so we initially came up with the concept of the sports. We put it internally to my partners and other people that we're close with. We then went to the core clients who all said they want it. Then we wanted to go see how the industry responded. And the amount of times I got asked to white label it in May was insane. Every operator wanted to go white label this product. And that made me realize, hey, we're onto something. So we launched it in May on the sports side, very softly, and we went back and refined a lot of products. We ran a lot of free competitions, did a lot of small entry competitions to get ready specifically for this NFL season. And so really the marketing just turned on at the beginning of August. So about 3 weeks ago is when we turned on any marketing for our sports side, because the NFL season is one of the heaviest betted, is that a term? I don't know if betted is a term, but most heavily sporting markets that people place bets on. And so we wanted to make sure we were really ready for the NFL season. And yeah, so our big competition this year is the NFL Survivor. We did a spin on that a little bit and applied it more towards the sports betting / picking side of things, where it's 20 rounds 1 through 19 are 1 week in duration following the NFL schedule. Round 20 is for the entire NFL playoffs. everybody gets $100,000 of virtual bankroll, and you have to be in the top 80% each week to keep moving. Otherwise, you're eliminated. And so, the whole survivor thing is why, Circa does the $15 million one. One day we hope to compete with the $15 million one. But right now on, with where we're at in terms of the company, we think 100,000 is a pretty lucrative prize pool because somebody's going to walk away with 50 grand at the end of 20 rounds. So most of our focus right now is on the football season, and we look forward to doing a whole season and, more importantly, getting a lot of that user feedback along the way. I always hammer on this to people I talk to our customers, to my entire team, is like that user feedback, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to grow your business, as long as it's the right user feedback. As long as you're getting the users that fit in your core demographic, giving you the feedback, you're going to go make a much better product, which ultimately allows you to go acquire more users, keep growing and scaling. And so we're really looking forward to seeing a full season of this feedback.
And if you extend the timeline out, Trent, 5 years into the future, you got crystal ball in front of you looking into it. In your wildest dreams, where is BullRush in 5 years on the sports side, and kind of where does it sit within the broader sports betting and fantasy ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And going back to I've done the raising capital, selling businesses, things in the past, and that's always a question that comes up as well. In startup world, you never want to think too far ahead. You want to think just far enough ahead to where you're making educated, informed decisions. And so I was on a call earlier today with somebody, and we were talking through it. And I'm like, we think and we plan everything 6 to 12 months ahead. That's sort of our time horizon, is that 6 to 12 months of hey, where we're going, where we're doing these things. And so over the next 6 months specifically, we have some cleanup items. Again, going back to the user feedback of, we have a lot to offer inside of our platform, making it more simple, having people understand what we actually do at the core of what BullRush is, simplifying that messaging. And then in the background, we're also working on some other feature updates. Right now we don't have the App Store. We launched as a web app. And so we're going and building out the actual app that'll go in the App Store, Apple and Google Play. And so from the next 6 months, that's really what we're looking on. I know that wasn't your question, but if you look out 5 years where I see this, I think we'll be at 5+ million users. I think the peer-to-peer multi-participant competition is only going to continue to grow in the space as people continue to get banned from sportsbooks, banned from prop trading firms, or bet limited. That's a huge thing these days. They sort of shadow ban you, where they don't outright ban you, but you went from being able to place a pick slip of $500 down to $1. Well, this isn't even worth my time anymore. Let me go someplace else. And so you see a lot of those people jumping to different sports books, trying to not have that happen to them. And eventually you're going to run out of sports books and you're going to have to find something else. And so I think, as that continues to happen, and as these big sports books or the houses, if you will, reject payouts, ban, bet limit people, this peer-to-peer thing will continue to rise. And I think BullRush is going to be at the core of that.
Right on, Trent. To take us home today, I'm going to hit you with a few rapid-fire questions if you're up for it. First one, you get up in the morning, you check your phone. What's the first app you open?
Ooh, that's good. It's either my email or Slack, but it's dependent. So I wake up and I have all of my messages, and it's either which email is most important or app. So I pull up my phone, I scroll through all those messages and click on the first one. Email or app. You pick. It depends on the day.
It's probably the right answer for a startup founder.
First thing I do in the morning, I wake up. My wife hates it. She finally got me to start putting my phone on airplane mode when I go to bed.
Nice.
And so it doesn't buzz all night, but that just started about 6 months ago. Before that, it'd sit there and buzz all night. But yeah, the first thing I do is literally check my phone and scroll through all the messages to figure out what's the highest priority and just start tackling from there.
All right. If you're out at the karaoke lounge later tonight, what song are you singing?
Some Frank Sinatra song. I don't know which one off the top of my head that I would sing, though.
All right. We had another recent guest that actually also said Frank Sinatra. So that's 2 on the board for Frank. That's awesome. And last one for you, Trent. If you could be anybody else for one day and one day only, dead or alive, who would that be?
Dead or alive? Wow. Do I get to pick the day too?
Sure.
George Washington when he signed the Declaration of Independence.
Cool. An important day in history, to say the least.
I was a history and poli-sci major in college. And I named my kids after presidents.
You did or you will?
I did. Yeah, one of my kids' name's John, and the other one is Theodore.
No way. That's awesome. Good thing you didn't have any girls in, I guess, so far.
Yeah, two boys. Now we're done. Completely done. I'm 100% no, we're done with that. There are surgeries that I perform to make sure of that.
Fair enough. I will not ask any further questions on that. For the audience, Trent, that might want to reach you to discuss anything they've heard about today and or to check out the product, can you quickly plug the best places to do all that?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we are BullRush Comp, COMP, on all social media channels, and then our website is bullrush.com. That's the best place to go check us out. We are prevalent across all social media channels. Thankfully that we have a good social media manager that runs that for us.
Right on, Trent. We'll drop links in the show notes to all of those. But for now, really appreciate you joining. Wishing you and your team much success for this first NFL season. And I'm going to go now and fill out my NFL survivor pool.
Nice. Thanks, Jesse. Looking forward to it. And thanks again for having me on.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. Positionless marketing gives every marketer the power to execute any marketing task instantly and independently. And Optimove Ignite Plus is its program to support early-stage iGaming startups. If you're attending SBC Summit in Lisbon this September, you can find Optimove at stand A555 and tell them that Betting Startups sent you to receive your first month free.